Every October, I like to focus on horror games, and few are as revered as Silent Hill 2. Even fewer are as thoroughly analyzed as Silent Hill 2. Playing the game is one thing, but digging into its dark, violent, and overtly sexual themes is an experience unto itself. It's an intense one to be sure, but one that speaks to the level of detail and amount of forethought that Konami's Team Silent put into the game. You see, there's stuff on the surface that everyone ought to pick up. The plot, the twists, the general meaning of James Sunderland's time in Silent Hill, these are easy to grasp. But there's so much more going on under the surface. This is suggested from the moment you start the game. The very first thing we see is what James sees, himself, in the mirror. This opening moment is everything. Silent Hill 2 is a reflection of James himself. As he exits the rest stop, we enter into a world that is simply overflowing with symbolism. Before we can discuss the details, we should talk about the general plot of Silent Hill 2. Let's not miss the forest for the trees, so to speak. This is the story of James Sunderland, a man with heavily repressed memories who's come to Silent Hill in search of his wife, Mary. She hasn't been seen in 3 years, but she apparently sent him a letter saying she'd be in this town, waiting at their special place. As James searches for her, he encounters fellow humans in town, disturbing monsters in the streets, and a whole lot of abandoned buildings. Now remember, this video will be completely filled with spoilers. Ultimately, we learn that James killed his wife after she came down with an incurable disease. He couldn't handle the stress, gave in to the pressure, and suffocated her with a pillow. This town, and everything in it, exists as a punishment for what James did. And it's the way the game conveys those ideas that makes it brilliant. Now, I'm not going to touch on every single detail or every stray thought I had while playing this game. Video essays need structure after all. But I do want this to be an opportunity for us all to think about symbolism. The stuff that's obvious, and perhaps more importantly, the stuff that's not so obvious. Normally I'd introduce some fun character at this point, some knockoff version of something from the game, but given the mature topics we'll be discussing, it doesn't feel quite right. And with all that being said, these are of course going to be my interpretations of the game's symbolism. Some of it is generally agreed upon, some of it might be a different take from what you've heard before, and you might not agree. That's the sort of risk the game actively encourages. This note in Brookhaven Hospital spells it out. He who is not bold enough to be stared at from across the abyss is not bold enough to stare into it himself. So if you're with me, then let's stare into this abyss together. When I look inside, certain core components come to light. James' internal struggle is reflected in everyone else in town, the enemies he faces, and the environment he explores. Ultimately, these impact the endings you'll get upon finishing the game.
I'm not lying!
No, I believe you.
This is Angela Orozco, part of everyone else in Silent Hill. She's the first human you meet, visiting a graveyard just outside of town. Angela and the rest of the supporting cast are their own people with their own problems. In fact, we get a glimpse into what Angela's version of Silent Hill looks like at a few points. Once during the Abstract Daddy boss fight, and again near the game's finale. Angela and the rest of the cast are individuals, but they also serve as foils to James. There's a reason we see another significant mirror the next time we encounter Angela. There are reflections of James in these other characters. They're points of comparison against what he did to his wife. In Angela's case, she grew up as the victim of incest from an abusive father, which is made abundantly clear when facing the Abstract Daddy. At some point, she stabbed him to death, justifiably so. Angela represents a righteous kill. No one would fault her for fighting back against such an awfully abusive family member. We must then ask the question of whether or not James' murder of his wife was malicious or a mercy killing. If she really was suffering under tremendous pain, would she have wanted to end it by any means necessary? The next character we meet is Eddie Dombrowski, a victim of bullying who's not quite right in the head. It's understandable to think that Eddie is also within his rights to fight back against bullies, but he clearly took things too far. In reality, Eddie represents an unjust kill.
Yeah, I killed that dog. It was fun.
For some, James's actions might sit somewhere between Eddie and Angela. Was Mary's murder a revenge kill for the time they lost together while she was hospitalized? Or was it a way to put her out of her misery? Silent Hill 2 isn't afraid to confront the player with these questions. On the complete opposite side of the spectrum is Laura, who represents innocence. People are usually drawn to Silent Hill out of guilt and a desire for punishment, but she's here because of childlike curiosity. She was also hospitalized around the time of Mary's illness, and the two formed a bond. Laura came to represent a future that Mary knew she and James would never have: a family. Mary cared for this substitute daughter, leaving her a letter that said she would be in a faraway place. Innocently misinterpreting that is what led Laura to Silent Hill.
None of your business. You didn't love Mary anyway.
As you can see, Laura doesn't just represent the life that James and Mary could have had, she also deliberately taunts James. But no character is as big of a taunt as Maria. While the other three supporting characters are people whose stories are meant to contrast James, Maria is a fabrication, a creation of Silent Hill itself. She's an eroticized version of Mary, one who even has ties to a strip club. She's built for the male gaze, and specifically James's desires, an embodiment of the qualities his wife lost upon falling ill. She pulls at the strings of everything James has lost.
Don't you want to touch me?
Not only is Maria a reminder of what was lost, but she also forces James to relive the choices he's made. She seems to be getting sick as well, and before the duo can escape Brookhaven Hospital, she's cut down by Pyramid Head. Don't worry, we'll get to him soon enough. Still not gonna do the jokey character thing though. Sorry, green screen guy. Despite dying in front of our eyes, Maria is later seen in the labyrinth under Toluca Prison. As much as James wants to take this second chance to save her, he can't. She's dead by the time we find a way inside her cell. I'll talk more about this when we revisit the labyrinth later, but in simple terms, I see this second death as a reminder that once James allowed himself to consider the possibility of killing Mary, there was no going back. There was no saving her. The hanging puzzle before finding Maria's corpse relies on identifying the body of a man who was innocently sentenced to death, just as Mary was wrongfully killed. This whole arc with Maria, Laura's innocence, Eddie's unjustified killings, Angela's act of self-defense, they force James, and us the players, to re-examine his actions.
Mary.
James does do a lot of self-defense in this game though. There are plenty of enemies in this town who are out to kill him. While other characters exist for us to thoughtfully compare to James, enemy design in Silent Hill 2 is a horrifying collision of ideas. Shame and discovery, guilt and punishment, and most prominently, sex and death. Character designer and CGI director Takayoshi Sato makes that abundantly clear in the game's making of featurette.
Everybody is thinking and concerning about, sex and death every day.
It's a good framework for looking at nearly every enemy in the game, starting with the very first encounter. This is the lying figure, and even its name has implications of Mary lying down sick in her bed. It's a hobbling, suffocated, shambling mess that brings to mind the image of Mary lying there helplessly. Yet it also appears to have high heels encased in the flesh at the bottom of its legs, symbolizing what James perceives as a loss of feminine appeal in his dying wife. This is a reoccurring theme in a lot of Silent Hill 2's enemy designs. Angela's own psychosexual issues are embodied by the abstract daddy, a boss which clearly conveys the image of two beings bound together on one bed. In her case, it's a matter of sexual trauma. For James, the monsters represent sexual deprivation. With Mary indisposed, his outlet for sexual expression was gone, replaced by frustration. There's a reason why we get a flashlight from a dummy wearing an exact replica of Mary's outfit, and why we immediately face another grunt enemy known as the mannequin. Mannequins are an assortment of legs, a completely objectified memory of Mary and her lower half. Who Mary was as a person is totally lost here, thanks to James' repressed memories. Art director Masahiro Ito has stated as much. That being said, no enemy is as overtly sexual as the nurse. They are buxom, they wear high heels, and their faces are completely swollen and unrecognizable. This represents Mary's suffocation, but it also serves as another method of objectification. It doesn't matter who these women actually are. They are simply able and ample-bodied ladies that James looks upon in sexual frustration while he visits his wife in the hospital. In some ways, he probably feels an amount of catharsis while fighting them. James's sexual desires aren't the only source of his trauma. The murder he committed and the shame he buried after doing so also manifests itself in Silent Hill. These dangling enemies are called mandarins, and they only appear a few times during the game. They represent his guilt, literally trapped beneath the surface and not allowed to come up. Where they appear will come into play in a moment, but first we need to talk about the most famous figure in this story, in the Silent Hill series, and arguably in horror games in general. This is Pyramid Head. In terms of Silent Hill history, he's dressed as an executioner from the early days of the town, but that's another topic altogether. Symbolically, he's a combination of a lot of these ideas, but let's start by focusing on guilt and penance, aka a desire to be punished for one's sins. Guilt is that nagging feeling that tells us we've done something wrong, and Pyramid Head's repeated appearances serve to remind James that he has committed a cardinal sin. He first stands like a stalker down a hallway in the Woodside Apartments, a silent, intimidating figure who could represent any number of terrors, but his introductory cutscene makes his role very clear. If the mannequins represent a sexual frustration for James, then Pyramid Head's assault of them has some strong implications. It's a release of the inner rage that James managed to contain, but he isn't ready to face that reality yet. He hides from the beast in a closet instead of facing it head on. Pyramid Head is more than just one of James' machinations, though. He's also there to teach a lesson, one that James is going to learn one way or another. Repeated appearances in the hospital and underground drive this point home. Pyramid Head is that unrelenting, nagging feeling that you did something wrong in the past. And yet, by being a reflection of James's guilt, Pyramid Head is arguably on his side as a form of penance, bringing him to a point where he can make peace with the past. In many ways, James and Pyramid Head are one and the same, something further proven by the fact that you can actually take his great knife for yourself. It's both a symbol and a pretty sick weapon. James and Pyramid Head are two sides of the same coin, and that's why you can't ever kill him. The first time you face Pyramid Head, he flees the scene after taking enough damage. The second boss fight is actually against two of them, after they execute Maria for a third time. The 2-on-1 fight makes for a good video game battle, sure, but this is the ultimate way Silent Hill 2 drives its point home. James killed his wife, and Pyramid Head won't let him forget it. Once James accepts this truth, the Pyramid Heads impale themselves on their spears. You can never kill them yourself, but they will take themselves out of the equation once they fulfill their purpose. Given the severity of that purpose, you can see why I didn't exactly want to crack jokes with a box on my head. Speaking of seeing things, the environment we perceive during the journey is also highly symbolic. Some of these locations are recycled in later Silent Hill games, but here they have unique meanings that reflect James's psyche yet again. This goes far beyond those literal reflections and mirrors. From the moment we start making our way into town, we're seeing James' repressed memories unfold. A thick, unyielding fog sets in. This was present in the original game as a way to counteract the PS1's graphical limitations, but it had the additional effect of adding confusion and unpredictability as you explored the town. Who knows what could pop out of there? Here, the fog takes on an extra layer of meaning, representing the cloudiness in James's mind. Wandering around and getting lost is expected. This is often how we wrestle with things in our own mind, mulling over the same ideas again and again, walking up and down the same streets again and again, until we find what we're looking for, be it a core memory or a health item. There's no way to escape this mental cycle either. James is physically trapped here by the roadblocks throughout town, just as he cannot escape the guilt he feels inside. As we visit landmarks around town, we get further insights into what James and Mary's life was like. Woodside and Blue Creek apartments are a symbol of domestic life, of the normalcy that the couple once had. It was a life that could have one day blossomed into a family. There's a reason that Laura first appears in the hallways here, kicking away a key in the same way that this simple domestic life was ripped away from James and Mary.
Ow!
Ha ha.
Hey, wait! Damn it.
From there, we go to Brookhaven Hospital, and by this point, we should all be very familiar with the symbolism here. James and Mary's peaceful home life was shattered when she started getting sick. Nothing in the game identifies the exact moment when James snapped and made the decision to kill Mary, but it's clear that the seed was planted during one of these hospital visits. I say this because Brookhaven Hospital is the first time we visit the other world. This is another staple of the Silent Hill series. It's a rusty, even more rundown version of the town that exists somewhere between parallel worlds, or perhaps at the spot where different dimensions collide. Much like the fog, this takes on an even deeper meaning for James. It's a turning point for the game, and for him, the moment when he allowed the thought of killing his wife to enter his mind.
Please promise you'll take me again, James.
It's nighttime when we leave the hospital, dark streets representing James' dark thoughts. This is also the first time we see mandarins clinging to a grate beneath the road. These representatives of deep, dark shame show up now for a reason. The consideration of killing your spouse is abhorrent, something you'd never want others to know, but that's where James' head is now. From there, we begin the slow descent into actually committing the act. We venture into the basement of the Silent Hill Historical Society, finding our way down into Toluca Prison. This is a claustrophobic place with its own violent past, one that we can hear hints of when standing by the right cells. James's descent continues, both figuratively and literally, as he enters the winding labyrinth beneath the prison. Here we get two different reminders of the guilt and suppressed shame in his heart. Pyramid Head patrols the area, and the mandarins once again climb around, taunting James with the knowledge of his sins. This all serves to symbolize the darkest moments for James, the rock bottom of realizing that he really is considering murdering his own wife. As we all know, he did go through with it, and at some point down here, figuratively, is where the decision was fully made. It's where Maria dies her second death, and it's the mental place where Angela and Eddie decided to commit their murders too. The boss room for the abstract daddy reveals the horrifying truth about Angela just by its walls. The thrusting pistons and holes represent the vile act her father committed. Eddie is confronted in a delusional room too. It's a meat locker, showing his worldview of people as nothing but bags of flesh. Eddie is the only living human that James kills in Silent Hill, and although it was done in self-defense, it again serves as the metaphorical flashpoint for when James made his murderous decision.
I killed a human being.
As with any atrocious act, there is a moment of calm, of reconsidering one's actions. James gets this moment as he comes back to the surface and rows across Toluca Lake. It's the calm before the storm, the pause before the actual act is committed. Then we arrive at Lakeview Hotel, not the site of the real-life murder, but the place where James's final revelations occur. It's where he begins to really open up and accept the truth. There's a vulnerability, demonstrated by having to leave behind all of his weapons and items to take the employee elevator. It makes for a harrowing gameplay experience, but it also shows James' willingness to accept the truth, to drop his defenses, if you will. Soon after, his crime is relived on videotape, as he watches a recording of Mary's murder. At that point, we enter the other world once again, seeing the hotel in a flooded, decrepit state. Its hallways are the last place the mandarins appear, having finally brought James's deepest, darkest secrets to the surface. Those hallways lead to a penultimate confrontation against the dual Pyramid Heads, who also fulfill their purpose. Lastly, we find ourselves on the roof of the hotel, finally facing our long-lost wife, or at least a manifestation of her.
No, James. I won't let you. I'll never let you have your Mary back.
This climactic battle may feel familiar, and that's because the image of Mary bound to her bed is one we've seen before. Back in Brookhaven Hospital, James fought a trio of monsters known as Flesh Lips. Given the sexual frustrations that he was feeling, the name Flesh Lips has very strong connotations. The final confrontation with Mary is an evolved form of that encounter, as James stands face to face with the woman, or at least a projection of the woman, that he killed. Killing her again in this instance, accepting the murder he committed to begin with, is what brings everything to a close. From here, one of the game's endings will play. We're not going to talk about either of the joke endings, although it is good to relieve tension now and again, so let's take a moment to enjoy the meme-worthy dog ending. Now that we've had a laugh, let's put our thinking caps back on. There are 3 endings you can get the first time through the game: Leave, Maria, and In Water. Let's get a brief summary of each, then we'll put a nice bow on this whole symbolic discussion. Leave is considered the good ending. James accepts what he did and feels atonement for his actions after the experience in Silent Hill. He and Laura leave together, perhaps even making good on Mary's desire to take care of Laura. You achieve this ending by paying special attention to Mary. For example, you can spend a lot of time looking at her photo. Maria is somewhat of a neutral ending, wherein a James who didn't learn his lesson and a newly resurrected Maria leave town together, with her becoming some sort of twisted substitute for Mary. As you might expect, you unlock this ending by spending a lot of time with Maria. Finally, there's the In Water ending, in which James cannot cope with everything that happened, so he drives his car into the lake to take his own life. It's the darkest outcome, to be sure, and it's actually the one I got in my first playthrough because I played dangerously. There is a 4th ending, known as Rebirth, in which James attempts to bring Mary back from the dead using ritual items found during a second playthrough. It's an act of denial, though it once again elevates the lore of the town, its cultish past in this case, to be more closely tied in with James's story. Regardless of which ending you wind up with, its meaning is further increased when you hold it in tandem with the flood of symbolism that Silent Hill 2 provides. Looking back over the journey, you can't help but consider how James's encounters with other people, monsters, and the landmarks of Silent Hill influenced the outcome. Did he redeem himself by confronting the truth and overcoming his struggles? Did he harden his heart further and reject reality, choosing instead to make a new life with a sexed-up illusion of his dead wife? Was it all too much to bear, resulting in suicide? Or did James see the opportunity to try something drastic, embracing the mystical qualities of Silent Hill to try to bring Mary back? Your interpretation of these encounters, coupled with the ending you earned, will answer the question in your own mind.
Now I understand the real reason I came to this town.
Thinking these things through for yourself is the goal here. Team Silent carefully crafted the experience to get you to ponder big questions like these. Meeting other troubled individuals in Silent Hill gives you a chance to compare James's actions to theirs. The awful monsters that patrol the streets represent pieces of his past in both overt and subtle ways. Even the buildings and locations you explore along the way have stories to tell, stories that reflect the spiraling chapters of James's own life. What we've been through here has a lot of accepted interpretations, but there are plenty of my own observations sprinkled in there too. You may find you view some of these moments differently, and that's totally okay. The beauty of Silent Hill 2, and of art in general, is that it merits discussion. It gets you to think about what you're seeing and express how that makes you feel. There are no wrong feelings, and therefore no wrong answers. What matters is that you simply observe, that you stare into that abyss. Taking that plunge is worth it. Thank you so much for watching our first spooky video of October. If you like what Framework is doing, definitely hit that subscribe button in the middle. It would help me out an awful lot if you do. And if you want to see what we've already cooked up, you can hit that link on the far left. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.